Hey guys, listen, today's episode is a really special episode. I'm actually doing an intro for this because I want to make sure you understand the gravity of the conversation that you're about to hear. Today I'm talking with Bryan Chesnut, retired Navy SEAL Bryan Chesnut. Bryan, when I went down his list of accomplishments and qualifications during his career, the joke I make on the show is that he has enough medals that if he wanted to wear them would drown a gorilla. 2 Bronze Stars, Purple Heart, more other medals than I could possibly ever name. Incredible experience leading soldiers into battle and solving challenges that we really, from a stakes perspective, don't often face in business. And then he transitions into a business career and immediately goes to work for Frank Kern, who, if you don't know who Frank Kern is, really well-known guy in the marketing space. And so Bryan goes from, a very specific career for decades into this new thing. And he really talks about imposter syndrome and some of the anxiety that he felt when his one career that really was what he'd ever known was ending. And then he's transitioning into business. And there's some really funny stories in there with his first interactions with Frank and some of the things that they had to work through. And then we also cover what's happening with Bayer Pharmaceuticals and the massive turnaround that Bill's trying to make there with that organization. But overall, this interview is chock full of unbelievable pearls of wisdom and actionable insights that you can use and how you make decisions, how you lead people, your mindset, your ethos. And then also, to me, my biggest takeaway was leaving with a normalization of the feeling that every time you start something new that's challenging, you're going to have a little bit of imposter syndrome. And if a guy like Bryan Chesnut can have a little bit of nerve and anxiety and imposter syndrome, it's okay for you and I too. So without further ado, here's our conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Bryan, welcome to the show, man. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me. I'm looking forward to having a chat with you.
Yeah, it's great to be here, JB. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So listen, you and I've had so many neat conversations over the years. And what's always interesting to me is that you have a guy who served at the absolute apex of U.S. Armed Forces for as long as you did and led in some of the most challenging, austere conditions, and then transitioned into the private sector. And I never served in the military and have spent my whole life in the private sector. And what's really interesting to me, and this doesn't happen that often, is when you and I talk about the core reason for things happening and what has to happen in organizations and with leaders, we often arrive at the same place. And so that's always interesting to me as to how that happens. But I'd love to get into, if you're game for it, how does one transition from really being the elitist of elite warfighters that the United States military has to offer with the SEAL teams, and then at some point, it's retirement's coming, and you're having to transition out of the thing that you've probably known for, and I don't know what you did before the military, but most of your adult life, and maybe as an identity thing, and transition out of that and figure out, what am I going to do next? And so like, how did that sort of come about, and what were you going through, and how did you choose business?
Ooh, so that transition, I tried to stay active all the way up until, it was like, hey, it's time for you to retire. And I was like, oh, I actually have to start doing this retirement planning stuff now. It was a bit terrifying. I've often said I'd much rather go through, the worst combat ever than go through that again, because the anxiety, the fear, the imposter syndrome that comes out, like, hey, am I even good enough to do this? And the first step I took, and it was kind of it was like a lifesaver, if you will, was I went to the Honor Foundation. And the Honor Foundation is a program that's it's like an executive MBA program, I guess, if I was trying to describe it. That is, they kind of don't worry so much about the leadership, because everybody's been a leader that goes through it, but they focus on translating military jobs, military language into business. And I went through that program and felt a lot better the whole way through, because it just started becoming clear. Like I like systems and processes. I like SOPs. I like to work with people. I like to work with dynamic teams in all kinds of environments. That's what my passion is. So that was critical, was first finding out, Simon Sinek says, what's your why? Well,
Yeah, love Simon.
had to find out what it was that fired me up. And which is funny, because 25 years of being in the SEAL teams and 18 years being on assault teams, I didn't ever even think about it. I just loved that job. And it was literally bottom to top. I loved it, from being a scrub new guy in a platoon all the way up to being the troop chief as a senior chief. I did not like admin jobs after that so much, but
It's got to be a door I can kick somewhere.
yeah, I mean, seriously. And then the best time I had in the Navy, or one of the best times I had, I was working with a guy by the name of Colonel Carty, Bill Carty. He had just evacuated Yemen, and I came out to support him with Special Operations Command Forward Yemen. That was the name of the command. And he's like, we're at desks in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, at the American Embassy. And he's like, do you ever feel like we don't belong here? And I was like, I feel like everybody's looking at us like they're not sure if we're going to start licking the glass or breaking things. And he's like, oh God, I'm glad you have that too. And it was really funny, because we're both at the executive level of military and government at the time. And we're having that conversation. It was great. It just,
but you had a vibe about you.
it was a testament. Like, we got things done for sure, but it was a testament to that we were so, like, he was so humble and down to earth that he could, turn around and say that. And the guy was great. But, moving forward into that transition from military into civilian world, I felt like am I going to lose my identity? Like, I have been a SEAL for 25 years, and now I'm going to be like a new guy. And I went through the Honor Foundation, and I was out of that program and had gotten out of the Navy, finished up all of my paperwork and everything. And here's the other thing they don't tell you. You don't get paid right away, your retirement. So you go from having a paycheck to not having a paycheck for a month or 2 months, depending on what's going on. So I was looking at my wife, and I was like, I'm glad you have a job. I'm now this guy that's unemployed. And about 30 days after I retired, I get a telephone call from somebody saying, I've got this guy that needs a COO. You'd be a perfect fit. Can he call you? And I was working on my pickup truck, changing out the air conditioning on this old my dad's pickup. It's a 1997 Chevy pickup. I'm literally working on this thing with grease all over.
Square body.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And
Love it.
I push the button, because I get a text saying, hey, can you talk to this guy? And I said, absolutely. And then I get a text from the guy, hey, can you talk to me? I'm like, sure. And then the phone rings, and I've got grease all over me, and I answered it because I'm like, hey, might be a shot. And it's Frank Kern. And he says, hey, this guy is a minor celebrity, and, he's a major celebrity in the copywriting marketing space, but, just a great guy. And he calls me up and says, I need somebody to run operations. Would you be willing to come down and talk to me? And I was like, Frank, to be honest with you right now, I'm about to drop my phone because I've got grease all over my hands. I'm working on this old 97 pickup truck, and I really didn't know you were going to call me right this second. And he starts laughing. He goes, oh, I love those Chevys, And so
That's great.
I said, I can be down there.
Well, he's a Georgia boy, I think, originally.
Yeah, Macon, Georgia.
Yeah.
So you had to, he says, if you can come in, I'd love to show you what we do. And I said, absolutely. I'll be down there tomorrow. So I went in, and that was the most hilarious interview in history.
I've heard this story, but I want you to tell it.
So he said, I go into the interview, and he's looking at my resume. We're sitting across from each other at the table. I instantly liked him. We both, he's got a beard. I'm starting a beard because I shaved up before I got out of the Navy.
Because you can. Yeah.
And he says, so I'm looking at this, and it looks like you've got a lot of operations. And I'm thinking about the resume I sent him. I'm like, oh my God, that's all military operations, like, missions. And I said, I don't want to mislead you. I think you're thinking about what's on that resume as operations in the Navy, like from outstations that I've run and stuff. And he said, yeah. He goes, so 25 years as a Navy SEAL. And I said, yeah. And he says, he looks up at me and he says, I'd fight you. And
Every time I laugh at
I
that.
missed the opportunity. I sure, we always talk about missed opportunities. Now, I needed a job.
Right.
I needed a job. But my kind of playful demeanor that had pursued me all through my career, like we were always cutting up and cracking jokes and stuff until it was time to be serious, but almost took over, and I almost dove across the desk to tackle him and, just like wrestle around with him. And I didn't do it. And to this day, I regret it, because that would have been, he would have loved it. That, like, he's that kind of boss. And started working with him, and he basically said, hey, here's the keys to the kingdom. I'm going to be gone for like 2 weeks. I said, I can't take this job until I can figure out if I can help you. So I've got to look at your business before I can take the job. And he said, yeah, I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks. You can run it. I was like, it doesn't work that way. I can't make decisions and stuff and run things. So nobody even knows who I am. I'm just this guy walking around. It's going to freak everybody out. So yeah, we just hit it off and just had a great time. We scaled that business up and did pretty well, but that transition was ultimately, it was terrifying. In fact, when I went to work with Frank, the learning curve is still steep. So I was putting in 12, 14 hours a day, understanding the basics and dealing with the basic work. But then after work, catching up on everything that had happened in the business to bring him to that point. And that was eye-opening. It was like doing an audit for 25, 30 days straight. So I was putting in the hours because I needed a job, and I had a massive imposter syndrome. I did not know that should I be there or not, so it was a big move. So that was a great question. It's one that gets passed up a lot. People think that SEALs and special operators and generally people out of the military are just bulletproof when they're coming out, because they've been in command their whole career. Well, we're human, and you get anxiety and you get nervous and you freak out and start worrying about your future and what you're going to do, just like everybody else. So that was
Absolutely, man. That imposter syndrome, you mentioned that phrase, and it's one that, I think there's two kinds of people in my experience who have had a lot of success, in different things, and they're transitioning to something new or different. There's folks that suffer from at least some degree of imposter syndrome and wondering, gosh, am I in the right role? Can I do this? Is this the right fit? Am I going to bring value? That's the one type. And the other type are liars. Dog liars. Or I suppose, I should add a third, because I've seen a few and I know you have too. There's also the sociopaths.
Yes.
They don't really care or think in those ways, but it's something that happens to everybody. And the darndest thing is, like you, I'm so fortunate to get to spend time with a lot of just unbelievable folks who have achieved great things in all sorts of different areas of life. And you would think that the more time you spend with people like that, the less likely you would be to encounter people who feel sometimes insecure or imposter syndrome. I've actually found it to be the opposite. Usually the more competent and accomplished someone is, the more humble they are and the more they do think, okay, gosh, am I going to bring value? And I don't know, I don't know if you agree with this, but part of me thinks that maybe that's where a little bit of the magic lies, is just knowing, hey, this is going to be a really significant objective that we're trying to hit, and it's going to take a lot of work. And I don't know if we have everything needed, but I know we sure as hell need to prepare to be ready for it.
Absolutely. I can tell you, I had a conversation recently with a very, very good friend of mine. He was one of my new guys that was an officer in my last combat deployment, or the platoon. And we had a very, very kinetic deployment. So he had some serious baptism under fire. He has since gone on to the highest levels of special missions units, and he is now in the running for command of a couple of them, or one of them anyway. And we went to dinner, and I said, "Tell me what you've learned in the 10 years that we've been apart. Tell me what you've learned." And he said, "Well, I learned that we had an amazing deployment on that deployment. Like, that was crazy." I said, "Yeah, that was being supported like that was crazy." He said, "It was unbelievable." He said, "I've found that in the 10 years since then, we as SEALs, we are bound together by brotherhood, and we all share one certain thing. It is an absolute certainty in common." I was like, "Okay, you're going deep. What is it?" And he says, "Imposter syndrome." And
Wow.
I had been coaching mindset calls and stuff for a couple of years for Frank Kern as well.
Yep.
And that was one of the common themes. And I just looked at it, I was like, wow. Suddenly the student becomes the master. That's fantastic. And he's like, yeah, he says, and you got to be aware of it. And you got to, with us, everybody's performing so highly that nobody stands out really. If you were really going to look at it, it's hard to get somebody that stands out because people are doing different jobs. They all do them very well. And he said, but everybody's got it. And, confidence is king. And as a leader, we have to keep that confidence up and make sure that imposter syndrome doesn't creep in. And I said, it's pretty interesting. Every guy every time somebody did something wrong in the teams, they made a major mistake, a DUI or some type of fight or something where they got in trouble. Everybody wanted to kind of distance themselves from them. Like, they didn't want them in the platoon.
Right.
They're like, that guy screwed up. I loved having those guys in the platoon. I'd bring them in. And it wasn't because I was a dumping ground. It was because those guys had messed up. Imposter syndrome was reigning, and it was fueling them. And the next thing I know, that guy is the first one at work, the last one leaving. Yeah. He's harder on himself than anybody else. And the thing that I have to do as a leader is rein him in, not push him. And it was great. I had great.
What a great lesson. I've used that same different area, obviously, but I've actually used that exact same core belief that I love second chance folks. And the second chance can be any number of factors that happen, whether it's when I was in the corporate world, one of my favorite people to hire, if we had the opportunity to do that, was someone who had run their own business at a high level, and then something went sideways, because it happens to almost everybody. If you're in it any length of time, it's going to happen to you. And, the shame that they feel usually is significant. And there's a pride swallowing humility for someone who was the person and running whatever, or maybe they came from another organization and they were really high up and something happened. And for that person to have the humility to swallow their pride and say, I need to go do this so I can take care of my family and provide some value. Man, everything you just said, those folks are usually, they're grinding so hard. They bring with them a wealth of experience. And they also, I made an analogy on another podcast recently where business, and you're the absolute wrong person to say this to for obvious reasons when I say it. But I do like this analogy that if you're going to be in business for any length of time on the front lines, it's not like any other fight. It's more like a knife fight, in that in a knife fight, even if you win, you're not going to escape without
you're
getting
cut.
torn up. Yeah. Wrong guy to say that too, because literal knife fights, but
Yeah, it's that's absolutely true. You don't go. I haven't seen anybody go through a startup or something like that unscathed. And the thing is, what makes the people succeed and fail? Well, sometimes it's luck. A lot of times, or most times, it's how you deal with the failure. How do you blame people, or do you own it and move? Like, you own it, adjust, move. And we always laughed in the teams, let's shoot, move, and communicate. Well, in business, it's own it, adjust, and move forward. Like, you don't have time. And you can look at it and say, hey, it was Bill did this and Bob did this other thing, and then Sarah did this thing, and that's where the cascade happened. And the owner of the business needs to step in and say, yep, and all of that was my fault, because I didn't give them the guidance they needed or the resources they needed, and that's what made those adjustments happen like that. So let's move on and not have it happen again. So
I remember being very young in corporate America, and this was just an interesting lesson that I never forgot, where there was someone on our team who made a really significant mistake, and the mistake, it was about $1 million mistake, and I remember this guy just being so beside himself and worried that he was going to get fired, and going into the meeting with with the executive that we reported to, and I never forgot this. The executive said, it was a very sort of just chill moment, and the executive said, "Are you nervous?" I was like, "Am I fired?" He's like, "No, I'm fired. Why would you ask that?" I said, "Well, I mean, I just made this horrible mistake. I messed it up and it cost $1 million." And he goes, "I just invested $1 million into your education. Why would I fire you?"
exactly.
And I never forgot that. I was like, holy shit, that's a really great leader, and what an interesting. And so I've taken that, myself to be something that I've always thought through is, everything that we do, every mistake we make, whether it's in ourselves or folks that work with us, it's all just an investment, and it's part of that process. And instead of viewing things as failures or successes, I just learned over time to view them as just points along the education.
Well, you learn more from your failures than you ever do from,
Yeah.
if you plan something, execute it perfectly, and nothing goes wrong. Well, it's almost like, okay, well, that was great that nobody got shot and we ran the mission. But like in our training, we plan stuff, we execute it perfectly, and everything goes wrong. And it's designed that way. You don't ever win until right towards the end of training. The instructor staff will be like, "We cannot drop a nuclear bomb on these guys because it's just not conceivable and they're not going to believe it." We have to actually let them fight their way out, or we have to actually have them fight their way out, and they will defeat us because they're better than us at this point. But we can't just start dreaming stuff up anymore because it's going to kill their confidence, and we don't want to send them into war with a lack of confidence. But those beat downs of never winning in the training are what made it so that warfare it's like, well, yeah, I mean, nothing's ever gone anywhere near as sideways as it did in training. So
the game was easier than practice.
The game was easier than practice. And now the game is more, it's more controllable, and it's easier to make decisions and things that some people call crisis. We'd just be like, this is Tuesday. It's not a crisis, not a big deal.
It's just a Tuesday.
Yeah.
I was like, I love to, I think an analogy, and I'm always trying to draw wisdom and inspiration from different areas of culture. So, obviously military is a big one, military history and how you guys accomplish the things that you do. Athletics is another big one for me.
Yes. It's even more of a microcosm.
The parallel that I just thought of was, it's no secret to anybody here that I'm a big New England Patriots fan. And I remember so many documentaries have come out, and I remember Brady actually saying that really the true key to their success, if he looks back on it, was that they were so relentlessly well prepared, and the coaching staff made practice and preparation so absurdly difficult on them that by the time they got to the game, they felt like the game was
relaxed
compared to the week of practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a little bit of release, because it was so much tension in just a miserable week of practice, and all the stuff that they had gone through, and all these trials that Coach Belichick had contrived to make their lives hell. Not only was it easier, but it was a way for them to finally get some aggression and frustration out on someone that wasn't their own teammate.
Yeah. And that is exactly how our training was. Like, we would go on deployment, like they're sending guys into war, and guys are fighting each other to get to the war. Like, if you got sick, there was somebody that was from another team going, "I'll take his place on this deployment if you guys need help." It was constant.
Wow.
But it was, by the time we got on deployment, that's like, this is awesome. This is where we do what we do. And it wasn't people saying, this is where we get to go out and kill people. No, this is where we get to go execute missions to perfection, or try to. And most of the time the idea was to capture the guy in his bed and get out of there without anybody ever hearing you. When bullets started flying, that was usually when it's like, "Oh, we made a mistake." And if for anybody out there that's wondering, the best alarm system on the planet is dogs.
Yeah, I knew that.
You know, the best alarm system in our house, I'll go a step further than that. It's not the pit bull mix we have. It's the Chihuahua.
Oh,
We just recently lost him, but he wasn't going to do anything, but it seems as though he didn't know that. And so anything that happened, he was just, a ball of teeth and fur coming out at you. But
the fur missile's coming.
that's it.
Yeah.
I tell you, so as I'm listening to your story and I'm just processing through what that transition must have been like, of course, I know a lot of your story. And so you go and you work for Frank Kern and you talk about a baptism by fire. So some of you know who Frank Kern is. Those of you who don't, you probably ought to Google him. Really, and I don't use this word lightly. You guys know how I am, but he's really a brilliant guy in what he does and the way that he thinks, especially in the world of marketing. Just a very interesting guy who has some unique ways of thinking about things. And so what I'm struck by is anytime you go to learn a new language, you pick it up to some degree and you're learning the basics of the way that the language is structured maybe differently than yours and you're comparing and you pick up that baseline. But even once you've sort of learned it, you're always having to take a moment and process input, the language that you're hearing, and compare it to the language model that you already know natively. And I'm trying to make an analogy here. So you spend as much time as you do with the systems and processes and the way that you guys would process through achieving missions in the field. And then you go to Hero and they help you bridge some of that gap. But now you're in it and you go right to working with Frank Kern, who's really a guy who's at the very top of his industry. And you chose an industry, well, I guess it chose you, that also has a lot of nuance and verbiage and idiosyncratic things to it. Did you find yourself almost, and I don't know if I'm doing a good job explaining this ironically, but did you find yourself almost having to take a beat every now and then and just process what you're hearing and run that through the filter of what your history understood?
I had a document open on my computer, my iPad, my phone. I had a document that was shared through those that literally somebody would say something. I'm like, what in the world is he talking about? And I would go Google it after the meeting or during the meeting sometimes if I wasn't the one that was engaged in the conversation. But my first meeting with Frank before he offered to fight me, he's like, yeah, we run an agency that runs Facebook ads for people. And he goes, you know what that is? And I was like, Facebook? Is that still around? I thought that was a fad. And he just started laughing. He's like, oh my God. And I was like, let me get this straight. You guys are doing stuff on the internet still? And he's like, oh boy. So he explained what it was. And I said, okay, that makes sense. I'm not on Facebook, Frank, but I don't know what to tell you. He says, well, you don't need to understand the nuance of what's going on at the base level. You need to understand that we have clients that we're doing a service for.
Yep.
And Frank is incredibly good at simplifying things. He's like, why would we make things more complex? It needs to be simple.
Yep.
Otherwise you won't do it or you'll dread it. And I'd stumbled upon a book he wrote called The Path, and he never published it. And I used it on all of my mindset calls and stuff for the clients. And because it was so good, it literally mirrored what SEALs would do. Some of the stuff that Mary said that was so good was, if you wanted to be a professional athlete, you should go dress like a professional athlete, do what professional athletes do, sleep like they do, work out like they do, sprint like they do. And that will help you. He's like, I'm not telling you you're going to get the talent for it, but if that's what you want to do, you need to go look like they do. And he says, if you want to have a really good funnel, then go look at the funnels that are working, and there's your start point, So he's really into simplifying things and building out a process that works for him. And then he's, SOPs and like anything that's repeatable, you SOP, and then you just stick to that. And he's also the guy that people would make mistakes, and we've got a Slack channel. I'm still in his Slack channel. I hope I don't alert them to that because I'm
not anymore. You're not. No,
I love it, but I still am on his Slack channel. I will peek in there because it's so funny because somebody will make a mistake. It's like, Frank, I did this. Oh my God. And I'm like, first, that person announced that to the group ahead of time, like found out that they did something wrong and said, oh my God, I did something wrong. Frank's like, oh, it's no big deal. I already called I saw it and I already called the client and told him I boo-booed. He took the blame for it.
Good leader.
Ends up talking to the client, and the client's like, hey, what do I got to do one of your higher level programs? He goes, so actually your mistake worked out really well because I sold them into something else. and he will call people. Is that a $497 a month offer or something? And somebody will make a mistake and he will call the person up and say, hey, we messed up on your refund. You wanted to refund this thing. And he'll talk to them. By the end of the conversation, he's not trying to sell them, but they end up staying.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just Frank. He is when he says, I want to help people by actually helping them. He does. And
yeah,
all of that comes from getting beat down in the beginning. Like I looked at his coming up into the internet marketing space, and it was very similar to Bud's for me and the SEAL teams. He got beat down, and it was not about winning. It was about how you were coming back from failure and devastation. How resilient were you? How did you manage that? And he did a remarkable job.
It's funny if I look at Frank's journey from afar, and I've met him, just a couple times briefly. One of them was a sort of a funny story where I was in the green room and he came off and I didn't realize that, if Frank hears this, he'll probably remember it, but I won't name the event, but they had this really aggressive smoke machine, and the corridor to get from green room backstage to front of stage, it was a big stage, was kind of long and it was narrow. And so if you guys don't know, that type of smoke is generally carbon dioxide heavy. And so when you fill an enclosed space with carbon dioxide and you make somebody walk that far through it, you either can hold your breath for a really long time, but if you're hyped up, you may not be able to. I think poor Frank, along with some of the other folks, almost passed out going out there. But when I look at his journey, what you just said, and I'm only just from a neutral third-party observer, and I think of Frank years ago and the way that he showed up, I never had a problem with it, but it was very different than the way he shows up today. In that before, I would say, with all respect, I would say he was more visually sort of this chill surfer guy, he had the long hair and the flip-flops and a different kind of guy. And then there was a point where there was sort of a hard and fast switch where he sort of almost became the Don Draper avatar from Mad Men, where he went a very different direction. And when you said, and the real only reason I mention this is, sometimes a lot of us, we already know what to do, but you got to take your own advice. And it seemed like he did that. And he wanted to really be able to serve and impact more people. And at some point, I don't know that this is true, but maybe he felt like, all right, the way that I'm showing up might be who I am inside. I'm a chill guy who just wants to help people. But the way others are seeing me and perceiving me might be limiting the reach and impact that I can have. So I'm going to change it up. And he did. He went with the suits and changed his haircut and incredibly professional guy. I don't think the essence of the man and his value changed, but the way that he decided to show up did. So it's like be an athlete, show up like one.
Absolutely. And I think that's it's paid dividends for him because it's broadened his audience. And I think you see there's a lot of people out there that they're showing up, with, again, no disrespect, people will show up and they don't look the part. They're on a laptop and at the beach somewhere, and they just don't look like somebody that's an executive at a business, and they're trying to coach executives maybe. And I think it is important to look the part sometimes. If they don't know you, then people need to see you in that box.
Agreed.
And I'm saying that as the guy that's always out of the box, but you know what? If I was going to go to an Army command and I'm going to go talk to a general, unless I was doing something that required me to be out of uniform for whatever it was, if I wasn't that, I was in a better uniform than anybody I was going to come into contact with. And I had a closer shave and a better haircut. And that was just how it was. because I wanted them to see that, hey, we play both sides of this ball game. Like
Yeah.
we're utility players, so I can be a professional, and then I can also be the guy that shows up in civilian clothes and looks like he got out of a garbage can last night. Absolutely. But one is concealment and cover, and the other one is being a professional. So
I love that you just said that, because I've never thought of it in that way. But the second you just said it, it hit me. So in my daily life, I'm dressed very much like a dad who's bringing his kids to sports, because that's what I am most of the time. And I do it so that I don't stand out, because so I can just kind of do my thing with my kids and do whatever. But folks are often jarred when the joke I always make is when I get a reaction because I actually do dress up and go to an event, and I'm like, well, I do own suits and I do look like a supervillain if I want to. So, it's hard to miss me when I walk into a room and I am dressed, but there is an enormous difference in the way folks respond to me when I'm just dressed like my normal daily life versus, when I spiff it up, mostly from my wife. So maybe I should do it more, but it is important.
When you look like a professional, you're perceived as a professional, and then it's up to you to disarm the people that you want to.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes a very good thing. And maybe, a generation from now, maybe they'll be making fun of us for doing that.
Yeah.
And that's great. I encourage change. But that's kind of how it is now. But one of the funniest stories I had in the military was we had meetings where each little outstation meaning like a team of individuals, might be 90 people, might be 150 people. We're on a video teleconference, which is much like a Zoom meeting. And there's probably 40 little tiles up there. And our little tile had like 8 people sitting around the table. And our boss briefed the general every week about what we were doing and what was going on. So the guy got what was called a sit rep, but he also wanted to have a visual on us. And so we'd have this meeting. It's like 3:30 in the morning in Iraq, but we were working from like 4:00 in the afternoon until like 7 in the morning, 8 in the morning. So it was just kind of a day meeting. But my boss walked around with an AC/DC t-shirt on and fatigues, and everybody's wearing shorts and flip-flops. And then when it's time to go, you're in your operation camis and your body armor and you go. But otherwise, we're pretty laid back. Now, when we first got to that outstation, that was one of them that was struggling. We were at proper uniform, did the whole thing, got to know everybody, and then loosened it up.
Yeah.
But so as we were loosened up, we were wearing our uniform tops, but we're wearing shorts underneath.
The weatherman look. Yep. I'm very familiar.
Word got out that that's what we were doing. They're like, hey, Strike Force to Crit they do things a little more laid back than some of the other groups. And the general loved us. And he in the middle of the meeting said, oh, by the way, Strike Force to Crit, can you guys all stand up? Well, we all stand up because the general tells us to stand up. And as we stand up, you see all these white legs underneath because we haven't seen the sun in months. And we're all standing at attention and we look like complete buffoons, to include our boss. And he's like, he fell for it. And
That's great.
And that was one of the this was a professional group, a professional meeting with like everybody. And this guy took that opportunity to just kind of goof off for a second. And it lightened the atmosphere across all of the strike forces. It was a phenomenal move for a leader to do that. And because he knew we would take it in stride, and, he was like, he had to stand up for a second. And then he said, you may sit. And every one of us got down. It was like we got down even lower. But it was really entertaining if you weren't the guy standing there in shorts in front of everyone. But
I love it, man. You know what I'm struck by with that, and tell me if you disagree or agree, but in my own experience, just as a leader myself, and I'm working with other leaders, I wish that I could say I had found some sort of paint by numbers book to specifically address managing morale well. there are a lot of things that I learned about literally how to run organizations, how to lead meetings, how to develop people, but not really when it comes to just overall morale and the way everybody sort of works together. And so I developed this belief that it's a lot more art than science. And some people, I think, instinctively have it. Others learn it. I had to learn it over time. But do you agree with that? I think that the great ones, it's a gut thing, and it's high EQ, and it's more, they just sort of know what to do, and they feel their way along when things are a little too tense or things are a little too loose, and they know how to bring that back to where it should be.
I think it's huge. And I think it's high EQ. Emotional intelligence is huge when it comes to that. For, again, like in the military, it was a microcosm. We would have, things would go really bad. So things would just be bad. You know, hey, you guys are surrounded. We're watching all kinds of people moving in on you, and they're all armed. And you would hear somebody be like, that's awesome. They surrounded themselves. And you just you hear people cracking up on the mic, like while they're trying to talk, they start cracking up there. And it's like, it's like the dumb guy always has to talk right then, you know? But it's so funny. And you have to be able to laugh when things get really bad, because sometimes it's so bad, that's all you can do.
Gallows humor. That's something that one of my favorite people to work with in business, when I know that it's going to be a challenging thing to do for whatever period of time, are folks that are competent, but also have slightly dark senses of humor, because it just makes it a whole lot better.
Yeah. I made a comment over the radio one night. Something happened, and the guy was running, and he was armed, and everything was going sideways. And I just was like, gee, you gotta be kidding me. And I got on the radio. I was like, well, it could be worse. And I hear this guy key up on his mic, and he's clearly sprinting. There's fire, there's shooting going on around. And I hear this, we could be on fire. That would be an example of worse.
It would be worse. Yeah. I'm thinking back to my sixth great grandfather. I did this, interested in history, and I did this whole genealogy project. And my sixth great grandfather served in the Civil War, and he was for the Union Army. And he actually, you talk about dark humor, he died in the Battle of New Orleans. And when you look into the records, what I'll say is, it would have been, it's great that our family served in that way, but it would have been cool for me to be like, have this badass war story of all these cool things that he did. The truth is, he died of diarrhea, basically, because back then, dysentery was like the thing that killed most of them. So diarrhea would have made that worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Diarrhea would be really bad. That would almost be as bad as on fire.
It's on fire. Or similar. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but that's the thing, is shaping those cultures. It was, people are, will say, oh, things in the military are really difficult. Things like that are not as difficult, because it's a smaller team. It's a culture that's already kind of there. And then you just shape it a little bit. When we start talking about, like, for example, Bayer Pharmaceuticals.
Yeah. I want to get into that.
Yeah. Bill Anderson's trying to shape a culture of a couple of 100,000 people. Like,
and it's an aircraft carrier that he's trying to turn 30 degrees.
Yeah. And then come back a different way. And like weave through the cones, but to do that, it's mind-boggling, the trust that he has to have in every person below him to do what he wants them to do, to be on the same page, that has got to be stress beyond imagination. Because for starters, he's trying to do something. It's a lot easier to change the corporate culture, or to do something like that and do it by the book that everybody knows works. He's trying to do something different.
The biggest problem was that the book, for those that don't know, Bayer, so he comes in, and Bayer has had a rough go. And one of the things that I've read in stories, just trying to follow this, is that literally the book itself was so insanely massive and bloated that nobody knew what was in it. Yeah.
And so one of the first things that he did essentially was say, we're going to throw out the book and we're just going to sort
1,300
of start from scratch. Yeah. 1,300 pages. Like, I don't care who you are. How in the world are you going to know what to do, what's expected of you up and downstream, and what you're responsible for if you have 1,300 pages of
I
something?
think that's the Iliad.
Yeah. I mean, Homer didn't even know what the hell he wrote. So to come into I agree with you, man. It's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out, to come into an
And that was
organization like
his
that.
first stop, was trimming that employee handbook, the corporate handbook, down 99%, because people are not going to consume. There's a Frank Kern thing. You got to have your offers got to be out in the first 8 seconds of your video. People are not going to consume 1,300 pages.
Nope.
So they might not consume 50 pages. Like,
And they won't apply it even if they do.
Yeah, they're trying to get to work. So how do you give them that information and then change the culture? Like, the other awesome thing that he's employed is he's gone out and said, I need you guys to self-govern. I need you to self-manage.
So he eliminated a whole bunch of mid-level people. Yep.
I mean, that's an enormous amount of trust in the person at the ground level. And he's saying, I don't succeed. The company doesn't succeed unless each individual succeeds. So if you decide you're not coming to work for a couple of weeks straight, you're only hurting everyone. Yeah. So people will hurt themselves, but they really don't want to let down everybody, generally speaking.
Nope.
And it's funny that peer pressure, that's a good example of peer pressure. It really does work. I've been in that position myself. I might go lay down and watch Netflix, but I'm not doing it when I've got people answering to me. It's not happening. Like, I'm going to make sure that work is done first, and I've taken care of what needs to be done for all the people. And I wouldn't even do that for myself sometimes.
The collective good.
Yes.
And that responsibility to your teammate. That's something that growing up, playing football, I would say football especially, wrestling a little different because there was a team component, but it's really you and that other person.
Right.
But football especially, if every single person on that team isn't playing their position, doing what's asked of them, buying in, putting in the work, it's not gonna work out. And so my son last night, Bryan and I, before we started recording, we're talking about, because Bryan's got two awesome kids and they're teenagers, and we've got one soon to be two, then 3 teenagers. And my son's at baseball practice last night, and he made this competitive team that he didn't even think he was going to try out for, because he didn't think he was going to. And I just remember saying to him, well, don't make other people's decisions for them. Like, make them make the decision. And so he did. And he tries out. And what I love is this guy, great coach. I can tell right away. He played in the pros. And the reason I say that is because my son's griping on the way back. I'm like, why are you frustrated? They had this little drill where they're all at the bases, and all they're really doing is throwing around the horn, but he wanted them to catch, receive, pivot, and deliver to the next place in a very specific way with their footwork and everything else. And so they had to do that while also still catching it and delivering it. And apparently there were these 2 kids who kept dropping it. And the rule was, if there are 3 drops, you're all running to the pole and you're coming back. So what was happening is that these 2 kids kept dropping it, and the whole team was running these poles. And afterwards, he was so mad. And I was like, what are you frustrated about? And he said, it's not right that those 2 guys just kept dropping the ball, and we all had to run. And I'm trying my best not to smile from ear to ear, Bryan, because what he's experiencing, you don't see coaches use a lot these days. So he's kind of old school.
Yeah.
That's how I grew up in sports, where the weakest link, everybody suffered the same consequences. And I was trying to explain to my son, my buddy, this is great. So what do you mean it's great? I'm like, because it's cliche for a reason. You're only as good as the weakest link on your team. So you guys have got to figure out a way to get those guys' level raised up to the rest of your level, or you're going to keep running poles. I love what he's doing.
Yeah. It transfers from like athletics. Absolutely. Like that. But in the SEAL teams, it was the same thing. You are only as fast as your weakest link. If you are going through a block of training and one guy is struggling with it, well, we put that one guy out in front and help him. The thing is it's of course, there's always ribbing. We give them a hard time.
Sure.
Of course.
Yeah.
But afterwards, when we are debriefing it, it's like, hey, so we had to slow down a little bit so we could get Steve up to speed because he was struggling. Steve, how are you feeling now? And and the objective is to get him relaxed so that the next day he comes back and the stuff that he learned is still there.
Yep.
And he's not so nervous that he messes up again, because messing up while you're nervous really doesn't help. We need to find out where he's at. And that's where he would be if he was just out doing this with nobody watching. So that was the objective there, was to literally say, hey, I don't care if you mess up. You can mess up 100 times, but we're going to be tired because we're all going to keep going, but and we'll never quit. But is there something we can do to help you along? And, eventually there were also certain parts where it's like, okay, this isn't what he does. This isn't what he's good at. He needs to know how to do it. We make him proficient, but then he's not the person that's going in that position when we're driving into combat. He's in a different.
And let's maybe find the thing that he is good at. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we put him somewhere where he is good. And the thing is in that community, they surprise you. Those guys. Yeah. They will surprise you at what they're good at, and it never ceased to amaze me. But it was the same in football,
Yep.
I'll never forget watching Odessa Permian win the Texas State Championships back in the 80s, and their nose guard was 160 pounds. And I thought to myself, how do they do that playing these monsters? Well, they were so militaristic in there. So everybody knew what everybody else was doing, and they executed perfectly every time. And it just wore everybody else down. So
because they were so precise. That's, by the way, nice shout out there. That's a Friday Night Lights reference right there. That's
absolutely,
that's what that book was about. That school. So really, if you haven't read that book, it's a great book to read. But
I got run over by one of those guys in that book.
Did you?
There's a claim to fame.
Was it Booby Miles?
No, it was actually it was a guy that was he was like the third ranked running back in Texas at the time. He was playing out of Houston, and his name was Kevin Bogan, I believe. He was up there pretty high.
Shout out to Kevin Bogan.
Yeah, steamrolled me and ended up playing with him in college. Yeah,
that's awesome, man. I remember one too. I got my bell rung by a guy who ended up playing for the Colts. We went to Syracuse, then went to the Colts, and it was a special teams play of all things, and it was my own fault. I did not have my head on a swivel. I was a little feeling myself more than I should have at linebacker. And this kid was a DB, and he probably only weighed, I'm going to guess he only weighed about 180. And back then I was 230 in high school. But he was one of these bodies that was just very long and just long levered, lean muscles. And I just remember coming down the field, and I remember going to look to my right, and the next thing you know, my ankles are above my head. And I remember thinking, that's not supposed to be where my body is. And then I land, and it's just like, and I'm looking around thinking one of their defensive linemen or something, they put him on special teams, and he clocked me, and I turn, and it's Willie Ford standing there just staring at me with a little look. And I was like, I didn't see that coming.
No, that just happened.
Yeah. So you kind of, it's a good analogy to business where what you said about certain SEAL guys who may be struggling in one area, you really, as a leader of any organization, have to develop an ability to mine talent and figure out, just because someone, and look, I've been this person. I've seen people were horrific at certain tasks, bad, were unbelievable at something else. And you wouldn't necessarily have known that if you didn't take the time to invest a little bit of time and energy, which is a lot of, in my view, it's a lot of where you work with Frank, you help his organization, you build that up. I know you then went on to work with, another really heavy hitter in that space. And then at the same time, you're consulting and you're building up your firm. And now you're at a point where I know that you do a lot of work with really helping folks identify, because someone just said this to me yesterday, and this is a common thing, and I want to call it out loud because I want to remove shame from things that we shouldn't have shame in talking about as business owners. This woman was unbelievable, brilliant lady, doing some really interesting things. And in private, she says to me, we're talking about scale. And she says, JB, can I just say something that's just going to sound stupid? I'm like, yeah, please. She said, I know because I've watched all the videos on YouTube. I've listened to all the podcasts. I know that I need to improve my systems and processes and operations. I said, okay. And she says, but I don't know what that means. And I'm like, thank you so much for saying that, because I think a lot of people, they don't, but because they hear it enough, they spit it out, but they really don't understand in practice. All right, I know that my operation, we're serving X client or customer and we're doing that to some level, but we could be a lot better because we're kind of a shit show. But I don't necessarily know what it looks like, because a lot of times it's a visionary. The visionary sort of is the person that builds it. But I'm a weird mix of a visionary and, someone who can do operations, but I'm more visionary. And those of us who are visionaries, we think huge, hairy, audacious problems and how to solve them and take the complex and make it simple. What we're usually not very good at is we know what we want to happen. We're not necessarily all that good at looking back and figuring out what are all of the things that need to happen predictably to make it happen. So what kind of, is that, it sounds like that's pretty much what you do, is you come in and I love what you said, by the way, about you have to talk to somebody first before you even know if you can help them. But what does that look like?
Well, it's problem solving. That was Frank Kern. The first day I got in there, I said, hey, what systems you guys running? You've got something like 25 clients.
Did you get blank stare from Frank? Like,
no, it wasn't Frank. It was the rest of the team. They looked at me and they were like, we've got Excel spreadsheets. And I was like, you hold on, what? Hey, so the 90s called and they want their spreadsheets. And they all laughed. And they're like, no, really, we use spreadsheets. It's like, no, you really don't. Do you, really? And I was like, hold on. What type of project management software are you guys using? And they were like, spreadsheets.
Excel, there's 3 tabs.
Yeah, it's awesome. Here, check out this really cool spreadsheet.
It's got a pivot table on it.
Yeah, I was like, oh my God, you're killing me. So again, I don't know the answers. And that's the other thing is the military specifically trained me for this. You don't know all the answers. You need to know where to find the answers. It was very, very, before I even got my Trident, a guy told me, he said, you're going to go to the Trident review board. There's 10,000 answers. Do you think you know them all? And I was like, I don't think I know them all. He goes, yeah. He goes, so if somebody asks you a question that you don't know, say, I don't know the answer to that, but I know how to find it and I'll get back to you. And he goes, don't try to BS these guys. They're asking you the question because they're probably a subject matter expert. So answer the ones you know. The ones you don't know, go find the answer. So I left the office right then. And I called up a friend of mine. I said, hey, Tim, you've got friends that are in the marketing space, right? And he says, yeah, he's a consultant. And I said, can you ask them what type of project management tool marketers use? And he says, yeah. And he texts his friend right then. I get over to his house. He had no sooner poured a beer for me or sitting there having a beer. He's asking me how my first day went. And I said, I quit early because I got to answer this question. And he says, yeah, the guy texts me back. He says something called Monday, Reiki, or Asana. And I was like, okay. And so I went and downloaded all those apps. And the next day I had a presentation for the people on the team. I said, we're going to use one of these things. And they said, okay. And we went through them. And one of the guys, Tyler at Frank Kern, who's just hilarious. Tyler says, I like Monday. And I was like, why? He goes, it looks kind of, I don't know, it's like pretty or something. And I was like, Monday it is. Because the guy that told me said 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. Doesn't matter.
That's true. I agree with that.
And it could matter, I'm sure, if you were really particular, but we're moving from an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah. When you're going from Excel spreadsheet, it really doesn't matter.
I'm going from rocks to arrows. This is wonderful,
You're not worried about ballistic trajectory. This is better than that.
No, we're going to get to muskets here pretty soon.
Yeah.
So, I said, does anybody know how to do stuff in these things? Talk about expert speak, right? And they're all kind of looking at me blind. And I said, hold on a second. I saw a flag on this other guy's desk, one much like the one I have, the little triangle flag, a folded flag in a frame. He had it over his desk. I went in, I was like, hey, Aaron, you were in the military. And he says, yeah. I said, what did you do? He goes, I was a comms guy. I was like, comms guy. So you know computers? And he's like, yeah. I was like, you know your way around a computer? And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, can you come out here real quick and tell me how you could fit into Frank's other business? And because he was helping out with a different piece of Frank's business. There's another story that goes to this one too, about stealing people and not realizing it and getting chewed out and taking it. Uh-oh. So I brought him over, and that was on a Friday afternoon. And my wife called me up, or my wife had tickets to a concert, and we went to a concert, and I get a telephone call, and Aaron's like, I uploaded everything into Monday. You wouldn't believe how good this thing works. I can do this and this and this. And I was like, at a Marilyn Manson concert. And I was like, that's amazing. I can't wait to see it. He goes, did you download the app on your phone? I said, yeah. He goes, pull it up on your phone. You're not going to believe this. And so I'm at this concert, pulling this thing up on my phone. I was like, whoa, that's way better than a spreadsheet. It's actually better than what we had in the Navy for project management. So I like this. I have no idea what it can do, but it looks good. So yeah, we took about a week and put that thing together, and Aaron became indispensable at the company. And then I was in my office, and this lady, Gerald, flew in from New York, and she comes marching into my office. I'm the CEO of the company. I'm the big guy, right? She came in and she was like, who in the hell do you think you are? And I mean, dressed me down like a Marine drill instructor.
Wow.
And I sat there, and I had the wherewithal to stand up and back up into the corner of my office. And she's like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm just going to stand here in the corner and just be wrong.
Yeah.
And she's like, she starts laughing. She says, look, I'm sorry. I'm a little emotional. I've had no sleep. And I was like, Gerald, that's okay. I said, what did I do? And she said, you took Aaron and started him working on this other stuff. And I needed him. He was working on this other thing, for Frank. And you didn't even tell me he's been working for you for like a week. And I was like, you're right. That was messed up. I can't,
Yep.
I don't even know what to say. I can't let him go back. But I've got to find somebody to replace. Can I do anything to make this right? And she's like, you do his work. I was like, now you don't want that to happen. But that started a great relationship with her. She was Frank's right-hand person all the way coming up, and really an incredible human being altogether, but she let me have it. And I was smart enough to know to back off and take it.
What I love about what you did is you do I'm a fan of, Chris Voss's work with negotiations. He was like the FBI negotiator guy. And he has something that he calls an accusation audit. And there's a lot of different manifestations of it, but you sort of did a real quick and dirty version of that, or you right away were like, yep, this is the issue. I'm probably wrong. Let me just acknowledge what you're saying and listen and hear you out. And what's funny is I've done exactly what you did before, and I've been on both sides of it. Because you're just trying to solve, you're trying to MacGyver stuff and solve problems, and you don't always think through, okay, how is this going to impact whatever that person was working on before?
I didn't even look at the other side of the company.
Sure.
Frank said, we're going to move forward with this side of the company. The other side of the company, we're probably going to just mothball it and move with this.
Which he may not have said to the team that was being mothballed, in fairness.
Yeah, I don't think he was really even saying it to me. Like he was just in kind of, this is the focus. And I went overboard with it. But, I had been at that company for a week at that point, and I was like, you need to, and I got mad. When she walked through the door, I got mad. The first thing that went through my head is, who do you think you are walking in here?
Yeah. Do you know who I am?
Yeah. And then I was like, oh, you're not in your home. You're a visitor here. Yep. And you need to listen and step back. And it was amazing. I let her vent. And then I had her, we were laughing about it, and then we fixed it. And we worked together after that. And she was just a great asset across the board, actually at a couple of different companies. But that goes back to, I'm not real big on politics.
Yeah.
But I don't burn bridges.
Right.
Like, there's no reason to burn bridges. If we have a falling out, then let's acknowledge that we've had a falling out and
Yeah.
recognize that we were still respect each other. I'm not going to talk any garbage about people and what they did.
Yep.
And
Yep.
like, just let's be professionals, and don't hold grudges. We don't have time for that. And that,
Well, and the world is too small. You just,
No.
especially business, you don't know. You don't know when you're going to interact with someone again, when they may need you, you may need them to solve a problem in the most efficient way. I'm with you.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to avoid it, rarely, but I really tend to, I always make this joke and folks don't get it, but it's like, I think of it like 80s pro wrestling, like the heels and the faces hate each other in public, beat the snot out of each other, made each other bleed, but they were always tight because they understood that without the other, nobody makes money.
Yeah. And that was that. I've helped people that I know, they thought I couldn't stand them, but they were in a bad enough position that they reached out for help. And I was like, I absolutely will help you. And they're like, well, I didn't know we really ended on good terms. I'm like, it doesn't matter how we ended. You worked with me. You're always part of the family. Like that's how it goes. So I don't care if we could be enemies, but if you are good at what you do, I'm going to try to help you,
Love it.
why not help somebody else by putting you in with them, but outside of criminal activity,
Right. Yeah. Something, or, generally something really immoral, which happens much more rarely than I think
people aren't looking to break things and mess things up. It's just
not at all. Not at all. So right now, and I know that you're always top of mind for me when I encounter an organization that has some good things going for it, and they should be doing, from a capacity perspective or a delivery perspective or a scale perspective, they should be on a different trajectory than what I see. You're always one of the first people that comes to mind. But for you to, to talk to the audience, and if someone's out there and they're running a business and it's just, it sounds woo woo, but you're going to get it when you hear it. It's just not right. Like you're the leader of an organization, things are just not right. And you're not exactly sure how, who, or what to change. It sounds to me like that's a great person to at least have a conversation with you.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you've changed the name recently, and I chuckled when I saw this. Is it Conan? Is that what the name of your firm now?
My wife is like, what you're doing, you're consulting, you're giving people answers. So it should be consulting answers. And I was like, yeah, that sounds good. And she came back and she said, she's an attorney. She's like, hey, I set your company up and the acronym is Conan. And I was like,
IP much?
For real? Like, are you trying to get me? You're the attorney. Are you trying to get me sued? She's like, oh, it's consulting answers. It's not, about the barbarian.
You might get to meet Schwarzenegger. I mean, it may be worth it.
Yeah, that'd be great. Getting beat up by a 73-year-old man. But she says that I like it, and I was like, I will stick with it because it will fire up my humility because everybody's going to make fun of me for that, and all of my friends do. It's like, really, Conan Consulting, huh?
And if there's no photoshopped picture with your head on the Conan type body doing consulting, that's a miss.
And
it's a miss, Bryan.
Now there will be, I'm sure.
You're welcome. In fact, if Frank sees this, he's probably going to have someone do it.
He would be the first one to do it. Yeah. But it's like you're saying when you're looking at your business, a lot of people, what they see is they're like, it's just like a bunch of white noise or a big cloud. Like they can't understand what's going on because it should be doing well. And I just had this conversation with a person. I placed her as a CEO of a company over in Dubai. And she called me up and she said, hey, the owner wants to cut expenses by $20,000 a month. And I'm not exactly sure how to do that. And I think and I was like, look, okay, stop. Cutting expenses by $20,000 a month. The expenses are like $80,000 a month. That's a pretty big cut. You've got one person on your team that's probably getting overpaid, and that's not going to make that difference. And I was like, let's look at something else. I was like, what are your sales like?
There it is.
And what do you mean? She says, well, explain to me what you're talking about. I was like, you guys ran Facebook ads. What'd you run? And it's like 35,000 of Facebook ads. And we go through the numbers, and it turns out they've got one person that took 150 leads that closed 8%. I'm like, that's pathetic. There's the number you need to adjust.
Yeah.
And by the time we tweaked it around and looked at like, if those 150 leads had produced the way the rest of the team was producing, that's $120,000 a month. So focus there. Don't focus on things that aren't going to move the needle. And
it's really hard to save your way to profitability. I say it all the time. It's not popular, but it's the truth.
It really is. And I'm not saying, blow money and you'll make money. No, you've got to go by the numbers. But the thing is, they had really good numbers. And then when you have one big outlier, it's like, hold on a second. The person that has the lowest close rate is also the newest person, and they also had the most calls. That's a problem. So explain to me where that problem came in. And you know what? Again, nobody was trying to mess things up.
No.
And it's really interesting. The person was based in Australia. Those leads were in Australia. They didn't have any salespeople there on that time zone. He got all the calls.
Yep.
He's learning how to close the thing. I was like, hold on, the owner closes at 68%.
Oh,
so you tell whatever, I'll call him Bob. You tell Bob that he needs to hop Sing over and get on the phone because he's in Australia now. He needs to get on the phone. And if he closes at his percentage, he only needs to take 20 calls and he'll cover that money. So stop looking at saving that money. Sure, you want to streamline that piece and you have time to do it, but there's a psychological effect that happens to your team when you fire somebody on a small team like that. It destabilizes some things and you'll see performance dips. I'd be very wary of breaking something that's working as opposed to fixing something or fine tuning something that's working. And an 8% close rate, that's not going to stick. That guy's going to start closing more. And if he starts looking at the calls that the owner does, then your problem should be corrected, given that all the leads are the same, and they were. So it's really wildly entertaining to see that. And it wasn't because I'm a genius. It was because they just need a second set of eyes.
Well, and someone that has what you're not saying that I know you have is when you were systematically troubleshooting with the stakes being as high as they were for as long as you were, where it's literal life and death. And I had some of that in my background with surgical consulting, where if something, nobody's shooting at us, but if there's a mistake made, it's different than other things where literally somebody can die. And the stakes are high. So you need to have a certain degree of precision and checks and balances and redundancy. But when you do that in that environment, I'm sure you just have this wealth of knowledge where things that are second nature to you. And this is I call this sort of the Dunning-Kruger trap, right? Everybody talks about the one side of Dunning-Kruger, where it's the folks who really don't know as much as they think they do and how dangerous those people can be. I actually think just as challenging can be the other side of that, where you have folks like us or others who are really, have a lot of experience, and that pretender syndrome, imposter syndrome comes in, and you can diminish how what comes as second nature to you is absolutely not second nature to other people. So bring someone in like Bryan or myself for different things. But I'm telling you right now, if you have any sort of problem that may in any way, shape, or form have to do with operations, systems and processes, how things are structured, the personnel that you have, the way that they're going about things, if you have that challenge, by all means, reach out to Bryan with Consulting Answers, because he'll have a conversation with you, get a little bit of information, and at the very least, give you a direction to look at for what might be causing some of the issue. And then if it makes sense to move both ways to work with him, then you guys can talk about that. But whether it's Bryan or me or any number of really talented folks out there, you don't have to do this alone. And there's no shame, and it's the opposite. There's no shame in getting to a point where you're just not sure what the next thing to do is and bringing somebody else in. That doesn't diminish you. It elevates you, because that's what leaders do.
Yeah, you surround yourself with people smarter than you if you can. That's fantastic.
Yeah. If I'm the smartest guy in the room, which luckily doesn't happen that often, I need to find another room. That's not where I want to be.
Yeah, it was same working out for football, right? I don't want to be the big guy working. I want to be the little guy.
No,
Yeah, always challenges
absolutely.
you. So yeah, absolutely. You can't do it alone.
No, you
Just
can't. You can't. So I'll put a link with this episode for where you can go and find and interact with Bryan. Always such a pleasure to chat with you, my friend. We went through some really cool things. I hope that some of you look back at just the story that Bryan told with transitioning from one career into what literally was, but also maybe looked like a completely different career, and has done that successfully, but also was able to navigate that journey in a way that you realize, oh, wait, there are some direct parallels and transferable skills that I have and that I can transition that are highly valuable. And the biggest takeaway that I have from this personally, guys, is that you've got a guy who, and you saw the intro here. This is a guy who has enough, if he chose to, enough medals on his chest to drown a gorilla, and has done it, seen it all. He's a very humble guy, so he's not a guy that's going to really lead with that. But truly, my words, not his, an American hero. And he's telling you when he made a transition from the toughest of the tough, the most life and death situations into just little old business, that it was challenging, and that you ran into some issues, and that you had some anxiety, and that you had some concerns. And for him to admit that, none of us have any more excuse, because if Bryan felt that way when he transitioned, of course the rest of us are going to feel that way. So I want to thank you and honor you for saying that.
Thanks, JB. I really appreciate it.
All right, buddy. Good. We'll talk soon.